Hello friends, I'm Renata with Renata's Garden and welcome to another episode of Unearth Horticulture. Today's topic is all about succulent strings. And many of you who have popped on the bus in the last couple of months have relayed to me that you struggle intensely with succulent strings. Many of you have given up altogether and I just can't stand for that. So stay tuned in this episode to hear a little bit more about how you can be successful growing succulent strings. Tip number 1, you must have bright light to keep a succulent string happy. Most plants do okay with lower light in the home and don't show signs of low light stress for at least a month. However, succulent strings can really bite the dust quickly if they're in a low light environment. Because human eyes are so good at adjusting to dim lighting, we oftentimes can't tell that our plant is in a spot that is too dark. So the trick that I usually tell people is to use the hand test. You put your hand in the location where you want your plant or where your plant has been during the brightest time of day, and you look. Do you see a shadow? If you don't see a shadow, that means that your plant isn't really receiving any light that is usable. So you need to make sure that these plants are in a spot that you can at least see a shadow for a good portion of the day. Without that light, your plant will bite the dust quickly. Tip number 2 is pay attention to moisture, but don't overdo it. With succulent strings, they have a much finer root system, and that means the roots are just smaller, and that makes them more susceptible to root decay from overwatering. And when I talk about root decay or root rot, I'm not referring to a disease. In fact, it's thought of in the plant pathology world as more of a symptom than a disease. So it can be caused by a disease, but that doesn't mean disease is present in your root zone. So just keep in mind that overwatering can cause root decay, but it doesn't mean that your plant is completely lost to some disease. It simply means that you need to cut back on the watering. So with succulent strings, make sure that you allow the soil to almost completely dry out before you provide water again. In the summer, this might mean that you water only every 2 weeks, and in the winter, every 4 weeks. The trick is to just kind of feel the weight of the pot or to feel with your finger in the top 1 to 2 inches to make sure that that plant has dry soil before you provide water again. Fine roots are very susceptible to root decay. Just remember that. So it's always better to grow on the dry side than the wet side. Tip number 3, just because you aren't seeing new growth doesn't mean that your plant is not doing well. Succulent strings sometimes take some time to show some new growth, especially string of pearls. String of pearls, it's difficult for us to tell if there's actually new growth appearing, because most of the time you think about string of pearls getting new growth at the tips, which they do, but there also may be new growth filling in the pot above, in the center of the plant. So don't get discouraged if you don't see new growth right away. If you provide proper lighting and proper moisture, your plant will start to grow after 1 to 2 years. It will start to show. It's just one of those plants that takes a little bit more patience. Tip number 4 is to hold off on repotting. Now, I know most of us, when we get new plants home from the garden center or plant bus, we feel like repotting into a really cute pot and giving that plant lots of space to expand and grow over the summer. And with most plants, this works well. Monsteras, philodendrons, a lot of common foliage plants that are going to put on lots of new growth right away. Those kind of plants, they work well to repot into larger size pots. However, with succulents in general, it's not a good idea to size up frequently or too quickly. And that's because they have slow growing root systems, and their roots, because they like to stay on the dry side, they do better in limited space where there's not going to be room for lots of excess water to sit around. So hold off on repotting your succulent strings, especially if it's on the small side. Tip number 5 is probably the most important, and that is don't give up. Succulent strings may be challenging to grow right at first, but once you get the hang of it, they're also the most rewarding. They're really entertaining to watch expand, and there's nothing that looks quite like them. So, I hope that you enjoyed this episode of Unearth Horticulture. Again, don't hesitate to reach out with questions. Until next time, I'm Renata, and you've been watching Unearth Horticulture.